Today we will be reviewing venting on an above ground storage tank. Here at MPTI's Outdoor Training Center we have an above ground 5,000 gallon double wall UL 142 tank. The first thing you want to do is identify where the vent actually is on this tank. We've talked about some other parts of this tank. These are the emergency vents, the pumps and different things. This is definitely the vent. It's pretty obvious. It's a straight riser pipe that goes into the tank. I can kind of see a vent-like structure on top. So that's the first thing you need to do so that you know what you're looking for. First, let's go over the tools that are needed for this inspection practice. You can see on this vent we would need a couple things possibly to open it up, look inside, and measure and identify what's going on. So let's go through those tools. At a minimum, you need a tape measure. You will need assorted pipe wrenches to unthread or open up different caps. You need a couple assorted hand tools possibly to remove a screen or disconnect something, possibly some screws to gain access to the inside. You also would need any safety items that you would need to gain access to the top of the tank. Usually these are pretty high up above the ground, could be on the side of a building. So you may need ladders, you could need a man lift, you could need safety gear, and you need something to tie off. This situation at our training facility, we have a safety deck so we can easily walk up around the tank. But that's not a real world situation. So you would need to remember to have all of those things. And last but not least, you would need a camera. Everything needs to be documented. The vent screen, the measurements, everything you would need to document so that you could include it in your report. Let's review the three main types of vents that you would find on an above ground storage tank. The first one would be a normal updraft or atmospheric vent. There's a lot of different models. We're going to go through a couple here real quick. Same concept for all of them. This is an example of one where it's a slip-on, has a set screw that locks it in place on the top of a vent riser. It has a weather cap to prevent rain, snow, different things from going down inside. And then it also has a screen inside, most of these do, that prevents bugs and animals and insects from growing in there and clogging it up and getting down inside the tank. So this is one example. This is an aluminum one, pretty simple and straightforward. Another example you might see more on a heating oil tank, diesel tanks, things like that would be this style. This is a mushroom cap, kind of looks like a mushroom. This one, you can kind of see there is no screen, it's been removed. This is one of the things we want to look for. This is a smaller one, and this one the screen is actually all clogged up, blocked up, and there's bugs and insects that have grown in that. So these are the things that we're looking for. But these are two different styles of a normal atmospheric updraft vent. Another style would be a pressure vent vacuum head. So these are designed more for gasoline fuels. They're vapor tight. They thread on, so they have a threaded connection at the bottom. You would thread it directly onto the top of the riser pipe for your tank. Things that immediately jump out when you try to identify them is they're usually labeled. This one's engraved in the plastic, and it also has a sticker. It's usually a yellow sticker. Pressure, 3 inches of water column. Vacuum, 8 inches of water column. How much it takes to open and close the vacuum spring or the pressure spring inside. Again, also has a cap on top with a little drip edge to allow the rain to run off or the snow to run off. These can be inspected and disassembled and opened up. They have a bunch of different styles. But the main thing you're looking for, again, good airflow. There's nothing blocking or occluding, restricting the airflow on the inside that would restrict the pressure of the vacuum to open and close. Another style is something like this. This would be threaded on here onto the riser, and there's a weight on the inside. There's no springs on this one, just a weight. That would be over here, and it would lift that up every time it needs to relieve pressure. The vacuum would be on the inside. It draws and lifts the weight up. This one you can disassemble to look inside of this one to see. It's got a couple different things. A nice, easy screen to inspect for an inspector, very easy to look at. Another model of that was the one right here that we have, and this is actually a combination unit because they had limited ports on this tank. There's actually a stick port, so this can be removed and an owner can stick his tank through this if he didn't have any other access ports. This is a nice little design for that. Then it has the opening up here where the pressure would relieve itself and push up. There's a weight inside of this. and then you can remove this to remove the brass piece for the vacuum that it would lift up. Last one will be a flame arrestor. Flame arrestor is similar to this, except on the inside, the internal components are a little bit different. There's a honeycomb basically to prevent flames from going down inside. It diffuses them going down inside the tank and then causing the fuels to ignite inside the tank. These are typically at a refinery. They're not on your normal gas stations or heating oils or emergency generator sites. So let's recap a couple things. So the normal atmospheric vent is typically for diesels. The screen, the weather cap, we talked about those items. You can't have it on gas. You wouldn't have it on acetone, different fuels like that. The pressure vacuum vent, traditionally always on gas. Again, when you go to a gas station, you should be able to look up and see the two different styles and immediately pick it out. This one's a lot bigger. There's a lot more internal components like this one, springs, weights, things like that. This one's very simple. So those are easy to identify. And then lastly, the flame arrestor. Flame arrestors, again, only needed when the vent is near an actual flame source. Again, typically at a refinery. Now let's review some things that we need to measure on this vent to identify if the vent is properly sized for this tank. So we need our tape measure. We need to identify, again, the riser pipe. For this tank, it's pretty straightforward. It's a straight riser coming up. It could be much more complicated if you're in a parking garage and you're multiple stories down below in a parking garage and it goes all the way up to the top where the fuel is delivered. So this could be complicated, so you may need more than just a tape measure. But let's just go through some basics here real quick and a couple of the things to identify. So the first thing would be the size of the tank. We already know this is a 5,000 gallon tank. So a 2-inch, this is a 2-inch riser, so we would want to measure the riser and actually identify, is this a 2-inch Schedule 40 steel pipe? Doesn't have anything else associated with it, no Fernco fittings or plastic or PVC. So far everything looks good. I know that a 2-inch pipe is acceptable for a 5,000 gallon tank. Typically that goes all the way up to a 10,000 gallon tank. Again, I'd want to check the manufacturer and see what they are requiring for this tank. So write that down in my report, 2-inch. I verified it is 2-inch, and check that's done. Bigger tanks, if it's 12,000 gallon tank, might be a 3-inch. Larger could be 4-inch and so on and so forth. Again, check with the manufacturer, or you could also check with other standards to identify that. The next thing we would want to do is, based upon the type of fuel, we want to identify how high up the vent comes. Now I'm standing on top of this tank. It's an 8-foot diameter tank. So I'm already 8 feet above the ground, actually a little bit higher with the saddles. And then the riser extends this vent all the way up to the vacuum piece, about another 4.5 feet above grade. So I'm almost 13 feet probably above grade. This is set up as a gas tank. So I'm above 12 feet. 12 feet is the rule. So I'm about 13 feet roughly above grade for where this is. We want to make sure that we document all of those measurements based on the fuel type and the elevation. It's not the elevation above the top of the tank, it's above grade. If we had a diesel or a heating oil tank, we would want to be 3 feet above the tank. So I already know that this is an 8-foot diameter tank. I'm well above the 3-foot rule. The problem is you don't want to have the vent all the way down at the bottom on top of the tank with just a little stub of a pipe and then the cap sitting on top, because if we had a good snow, if we're in an area where there is snow, that could potentially cover up and freeze and then seal the vent in, and then the tank would solely be relying on the emergency vents. So you want to know the area you are in, maybe have that vent pipe still extended another 2 feet, 3 feet, something like that. So it's not necessarily the maximum, that's the minimum, and then you have to use based on the area where you are, how high up the rest of it may extend for the snow or something else like that. You also lastly need to identify openings of buildings. So we're not near a building, there's an adjacent building here, but we're not really near any building openings for this vent. But let's say that the tank is next to a building and the vent pipe goes over and then up and is attached to the side of the building, and there is a window that can be opened, a door, maybe we're at a generator site, and there's the air intakes for the generator, powered, fresh air, things like that. So let's talk about that. So a door, a window, or an open louver, the vent cannot be any closer than 5 feet. We don't want the vapors of the tank going directly into the building if there's a chance to open the door, window, or the louver. If it's a powered intake, such as like a generator where they have a fan that draws the air in, we need to be 15 feet away. The last thing we want to do is we want to use some of our tools to take a closer look at the assembly. So for this one, for example, I've already done it, but we would want to use a pair of pliers and remove the retaining clip so that we can get access to the screen to actually remove the screen and then look inside of the actual vent head assembly to get a better look to see if there's any things that are inside restricting the flow. So let's take a closer look at that. So now that we've removed the retaining clip to gain access to the screen, we'll go ahead and set that up here because we need to put it back. Sometimes you might need some tools, but this one we just kind of wiggle it a little bit. We first want to inspect the screen and just see that it's nice and clean and there's nothing growing or rusting and blocking the screen. We can clearly see straight through that. We'll set that right up there. Then we're going to want to get our flashlight out and we're going to want to look through this opening. And this should be wide open going down. We'd also want to remove these screws to gain access down into here. But right now, looking inside of this, I can clearly see a nice honeycomb of a bee's nest or a wasp nest. So these are the things that we're looking for. This one's actually pretty in depth, going all the way down and in there. As an inspector, it's very easy to remove these and rip these out, clean what we can see. Might even need a mirror to look down a little bit further. But these are the things we're looking for. This is why we're inspecting vents and the screens to make sure that they're not blocked, which would cause a restriction. Main thing after you're done all of this is make sure you put this all back together again after you've cleaned that out. Make sure you put this all back in nice and neat and re-secure the retaining clip to put everything back the way that it was so that it's the way that you started. So in summary, 3 final things that we want to note when we're inspecting vent pipes. First off, absolutely ensure that there are no restrictions, limitations to the vent. In this one, we clearly saw that there is some restrictions that were able to be removed during the inspection, but there could be a lot of other things. So make sure no restrictions, no limitations. It's not throttled down. It doesn't go from 2 inch down to 1 inch. It doesn't have other connections or fittings. That's very, very important. Number 2, photos, photos, photos. Take photos of everything, the model number, the diameter, the length of the run, everything. Lots and lots of pictures, especially something like this. Owners want to see that, and you want to include that in your report. And last but not least, if you've inspected tanks, you will know that this is true. Be aware of bees. When you're on top of a tank and all of a sudden you pull that apart and there are bees in there in the middle of the summer, you will be running off the top of a tank. So watch out for the bees. Thank you.